Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, The Plight of Plastic. My name is Jennifer Schultz, Program Principal at NCSL, and I'll be your moderator. This is the fourth webinar in a series of 6 sponsored by NCSL's Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee this year. Upcoming webinar topics include cell-cultured meat and electric grid transformation. For a complete schedule and registration details, please visit our website at ncsl.org. Today's webinar is a platform for information exchange and engagement. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage participation through our chat box, which is found in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to type your questions at any time during the presentations. We will address as many as we can at the end. Just so we're all familiar with using the chat box, I invite you to type in the state you're from now. It's also helpful to see who's on the line today. Our webinar is being recorded. We will send out a notice to all registrants when the recording and presentation slides are posted to our website. Additionally, you can download the presentation slides and speaker bios at any time by clicking on the Resources and Speakers tabs. Now that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get to why we're here. As we all know, plastic is all around us in some form or another, and increasingly plastic is the subject of legislation. In the past year alone, state legislatures have considered more than 200 bills related to plastic bags, straws, polystyrene, and other packaging. While most would ban or otherwise curtail single-use plastics, others impose a ban on bans, preempting action at the local level. Our speakers today will discuss the problem from various points of view and what is being done and can be done to help solve it. Joining us today are Angela Howe, Legal Director for the Surfrider Foundation, and Keith Christman, Managing Director of Plastic Markets for the American Chemistry Council. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Before we get going, I just quickly want to share a few resources that NCSL has on this topic. Our Environment and Natural Resources Bill Tracking Database contains legislation from all 50 states related to plastic and a host of other policy areas. The database is fully searchable. I took a screenshot of my results when searching for bills under the topic Waste and Recycling Plastic in all states for 2019. Clicking on the individual bill numbers will take you to the full text of the bill. We also have a web page that summarizes plastic legislation at ncsl.org. So first up, we have Angela Howe. She directs the Surfrider Foundation's legal strategy and advocacy efforts throughout the U.S. in order to guide grassroots chapters on beach access efforts, plastic pollution policy, sea level rise, and environmental litigation. She is also an adjunct professor of ocean and coastal law, serves as chair of the Clean Seas Coalition, and has consulted the United Nations Environment Assembly on ocean issues. Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am happy to be here today to talk to you guys about our plastic pollution initiative at Surfrider Foundation and state action on plastics. Surfrider Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3 environmental organization dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's ocean, waves, and beaches. And we have 80 grassroots chapters nationwide, as well as over 100 school clubs. And a lot of people know us as, oh, that beach cleanup organization. But we've gone a little further than that in our past 35 years. In cleaning up what's on the beach, our activists started to see that, hey, there's a lot of plastic here, and started to learn more and more about plastics accumulation in the gyres and that it doesn't break down in ocean waters and what it's doing to our marine life. So Surfrider developed a Rise Above Plastics program dedicated to educating individuals about the harms of plastics on the marine environment, and also advocacy. So advocacy for a change in local, state, and national laws, a lot based at the local level, and things like encouraging reusable shopping bags, reusable coffee mugs, and cups, bottles, what have you, to reduce the amount of single-use plastics, especially the problematic items that we find on the beach, which bags and bottles are always top 10. So go to the next slide. So just going to talk a little bit about the plastic pollution problem. Picture's worth 1,000 words, so we have 4,000 here. But just shows a little bit of the effect of habitat and species. Obviously, sea turtles are eating plastic bags that look like jellyfish. They're also affected by straw pollution. Bottle caps are found in the stomach of birds. It's affecting recreation, as you can see by the middle picture, found in the waves, which we're surfing, but nobody wants to surf on or swim in dirty water or lie down on a dirty beach. So that's actually a really important cost to ocean and coastal tourism as well. And then, of course, the fourth picture there is supposed to make you think a little bit more about how this is affecting the food chain. So what goes in the ocean goes in you. And this is a PSA we've had for a few years. Obviously, no one would eat a piece of sushi that looks like that. But, you know, plastics are found in the bellies of fish, and fish we eat. So it's a major food source for the world. And what is that doing to human health? Next slide here. So this is sources from the UN and the EU Commission, and with just some great information about, you know, it's projected more plastic than fish in the ocean by weight by 2050. I think a lot of people have heard that. The press has really blown that statistic up. But it goes deeper. The UN projects 100 to 250 million tons of mismanaged plastic by 2025. And you can see the top 10 single-use plastic items found on seashores. That information is from the European Commission, and that actually drove the European Parliament and the European Union to address those top 10 pieces of plastics with a comprehensive single-use plastic bill this past year. And this is just a 2015 Jenna Jambeck study that a lot of people have referenced. And it shows that around 8.8 million tons of plastic enter the ocean each year. This is the same as emptying a garbage truck of plastic into the ocean every minute. And 322 million tons of plastic produced in 2015. That's about 900 Empire State Buildings. So it just gives you a sense of the breadth of what's out there. There's more microplastics in the ocean than stars in the Milky Way, another stat that helps with visualization. So let's go on to state legislative movement to address plastic pollution. And there's a whole lot out there. The next 5 slides are from the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. I presented with them in April, and they did a good job of pulling together just a visual look at what's going on. There's over 200 bills, plastic bills at play in 34 states. And this is everything from plastic bag regulations. We just saw one pass in New York, I think last month, or on April 1st. And there's currently 62 bills in 18 states. California implemented a ban on bags in grocery stores in 2016, so it was the first state. Hawaii did it county by county. New York just did a bag ban regulation only on plastic bags without a fee on paper, but they encouraged localities to put a fee on paper. So we're seeing a little bit different types of laws, but we're starting to get some effectiveness data back from California as well, which is very useful. So there's also polystyrene or foam foodware, commonly known as styrofoam, which is a trademark name. Maine was the first state in the nation to ban foam foodware. This is especially problematic because it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, which are very difficult to pick up off the beach, and it's always a top form of litter as well. So there's 36 bills, or sorry, 35 in 11 states, and Maine was quickly followed by Maryland. That also passed a foam ban with the governor's signature in the past month. Oregon, and I believe there's 1 or 2 others, perhaps, well, Maine already did it, perhaps Vermont are likely to do so in the very near future. On to straws. Obviously, straws have been in the news quite a bit over the past couple of years. 37 bills in 21 states. California actually passed a bill in 2017, straws upon request. So we're seeing anything from a full ban to straws upon request. And we're also seeing comprehensive legislation that's bag, foam, and straws, or bag, foam, stir, straw regulations at the state level. Finally, there's miscellaneous legislation. This is anything from establishing a Plastic Pollution Awareness Day to a bottle deposit bill. So we're seeing that in Nevada, Massachusetts, but this is kind of a catch-all category. So from a Surfrider perspective, we've really seen this come from the local level, just bubble up from what's happening at the local level. In 2008, San Francisco was the first city in the nation to pass a local bag ban. This was followed by 375 other local bag regulation ordinances. So there's a lot happening all throughout the country. There's been over 120 local foam ordinances. And then we're seeing more and more comprehensive legislation. San Francisco seems to go farther every year with regulation of chemicals and the alternatives packaging. So, you know, we don't want to replace something with something that's more dangerous. So that one just passed in August and was really geared at PFAS and other coatings for alternative packaging. And then we're seeing combined laws, like I stated, the bag, foam, and straws, the trifecta, which was passed in Charleston. And then San Diego already had a bag ban, but they had a foam, straws, and stirrers and utensils ban that passed in January of this year. And this picture is really good. It shows a little bit about the gray states that have already passed a state or have local bag bans. The orange states, which have preempted local bag bans or local bag foam and auxiliary container regulation at the local level, so only can be done at the state level. And then the ones with the blue outlines are actually the states that have a repeal of state preemption in play. So there's a lot going on with the preemption story. We're really seeing quite a back and forth about state and local control on the issue. And Surfrider advocates for localities to have the right to regulate for the safety and environmental protection at the local level, and also to the same extent that states are the laboratories of democracy for the federal government, localities are as well. These plastic pollution control regulations are tested at the local level, and once those are seen to be successful, they bubble up to make good statewide policy. This year, the ones who preempted local action were Oklahoma, Tennessee, and North Dakota. So I think the list is up to 14 or so on preempted states. This slide goes a little bit more into the state-by-state movement. There's been a lot on microplastics, which include microfibers, which are in our clothes and being washed out through washing machines into the watershed. So we're still studying those, and California and Connecticut actually have good research bills on that. You have anything from Plastic Pollution Awareness Day to other resolutions and funding mechanisms to study and create awareness of the problem. We talked about straws upon request and bag bans. Obviously, there's a bill proposed in many different places, and I think, you know, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Maine are all ones that I've heard have a lot of momentum at this point. It's important to note that a bag ban with a fee on paper is what Surfrider Foundation has advocated for. We have a toolkit that points to good resources for what a bag ban should look like. It shouldn't just drive people to single-use paper bags. It should really drive people to reusable bags and away from the single-use throwaway culture. And comprehensive legislation. So obviously you have some laws that address many items in one bill, but then also we have this cutting-edge Plastic Pollution Reduction Act in California, SB 54 and AB 1080, that's setting a target of 75% reduction of single-use plastics packaging and single-use products by 2030. So that's really interesting legislation. It was amended to make the product list also match the 10 most commonly littered items list. So it's also getting at, what we're finding in our environment and on our beaches. And then you have states that take that first step of regulating what can be provided in state facilities. So we've had something passed in Maryland, North Carolina, and California, and proposed in many other states. So either banning foam or banning plastic water bottles or single-use plastic bags in state facilities. There has been movement on plastics in Europe, as I mentioned. They went from everything from required consumption reductions to market restrictions, which are bans, product design requirements, so maybe connect the caps to make sure that the caps don't fly off and end up in birds' stomachs, requirements on labeling, and extended producer responsibility, collection objectives, and awareness raising. They put that all in one massive single-use plastics directive. It's something that I know many state legislators in the U.S. have taken note of as well. And then I just want to note that there's momentum for this at the state level, increasing awareness and coordination to fight plastic pollution at multiple levels. We've definitely seen it explode over the past 2 years. We have inspiration from localities, and then effectiveness data rolling in from California. So this is from a study, the grid here is from a study on the SB 270 law that went into place, and CalRecycle is in charge of the state agency in charge of understanding how that law is working out. And they found that 11% of people are buying reusable bags, which costs a minimum of 10 cents, and 3% of people are buying paper bags, and the rest are taking no bag. They have their own bags, so they're either bringing in their own bags or have no bag at all. So we say that it's really working out here in California, and that's with a ban on single-use thin plastic and a fee on reusable or paper bags. And with that, I'll wrap up and hand it over to Keith.
All right, thank you, Angela. As a reminder to the audience, you can type your questions in the chat box at any time. I see a few in there. So let's move on. Next up, we have Keith Christman, Managing Director of Plastic Markets for the American Chemistry Council. He oversees ACC's marine debris, packaging, building and construction, automotive, and other market team advocacy. He also served as chairman of the industry's Global Action Team, leading the implementation of a declaration by global plastics associations for solutions on marine litter for 7 years. He has been with ACC since 1991. Keith, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you on plastics and what we're doing to reduce marine litter. It is one aspect of my job there when we have a team that is working on that. The other parts that were mentioned were things about a little bit about building and construction. They're also in my role, and in that role, we're working to promote energy conservation code around the country and increase building standards for energy conservation. In the automotive area, we're working on lightweighting cars and trucks to increase fuel economy. And in packaging and marine debris, as mentioned, we're working to reduce marine litter and increase the recycling of plastics. So the ACC is a trade association. We represent the manufacturers of plastic resin, the raw material that we use to make plastic products out of it. And so look forward to talking with you here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits and sustainability of plastics, the role it plays in society, some of the challenges we have today, and also what we're doing as an industry to reduce marine debris and promote and increase circular economy for plastics. I think one thing that's very important for everyone to understand when it comes to plastics is that plastics do play an important role in society. They help us lightweight our cars, make them more fuel efficient. The foam insulation that we have in our buildings dramatically reduces energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And in consumer products and packaging, plastics also play a pretty important role. The environmental firm TrueCost accounting firm was asked by the United Nations to look at the natural capital costs of using plastics back in, I think it was around 2014. And at that time, they calculated a natural capital cost around $90 billion. We followed up and asked them to, well, how could we reduce that? What are the methods to reduce the natural capital cost of plastics on the environment? One of the things they looked at was switching to alternatives. And they concluded that switching to alternatives would actually increase environmental costs by nearly 4 times. And the reason for that is because alternatives tend to use about 4 times more material by mass. So the alternatives weigh a lot more, they use a lot more material, and as a result, consume more resources in manufacturing and produce more greenhouse gas emissions in those processes, as a general rule. This was across 16 consumer goods sectors and looked at a wide range of impacts, including greenhouse gas emissions and impact on the ocean. So I provided that as a resource in the along with the slides. Another, looking specifically at a certain type of package, one that's not recyclable, in fact, today, plastic brick pack for coffee and coffee packaging. It uses so little material compared to a steel can that the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that are about 1/4 that of the steel can. And that's even considering the fact that the steel can has an 80% recycling rate in the United States. So that was considered as part of this life cycle assessment. We're not stopping there with the sustainability of the plastic brick pack. Our goal is, that, as I'll talk about later, is to get to 100% recycling of plastic packaging. So we've got more work to do there, and we're further going to increase the sustainability of that package. Another very important role plastic plays in society is reducing food waste. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, food waste, if it was a country, would be the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So protecting our food, making sure it makes it to the families that need it, is very important, and plastic plays an important role there. I've got a couple of examples there on the screen. One, a cucumber. People sort of wonder why you need to wrap a cucumber, but a cucumber in a grocery store will be thrown away after 3 days because it loses so much of its water through evaporation. A little bit of plastic, it lasts for 14 days and stays fresh and allows people to actually eat it. Similar information on bananas and salads, dramatically reducing food waste through the use of a little bit of packaging that helps keep things fresh. That said, with those benefits of plastic, we have huge challenges. Marine debris is a huge challenge. We need to keep plastics and other materials out of our environment and out of the ocean, and that's an important goal for us. Going back to, Angela presented some data from Jenna Jambak, who was published in Science Magazine in, I believe, early 2015, looked at plastics going into the ocean. And Angela mentioned that it was about 8 million metric tons per year, and that's sort of the mid-range estimate. The higher range estimates for each country are shown in these bubbles. 5 countries in Asia account for about 60% of the total amount of material going into the ocean every year. China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines are the leading countries there. The United States, by contrast, accounts for about 1%. The World Bank also looked at trash coming down rivers in Indonesia, and they found all manners of trash coming down the rivers. Organic waste accounted for 44% of the trash coming down the rivers, diapers 21%, and then a wide range of other materials, including plastic bags, and in many cases, those plastic bags were actually filled with trash. So the World Bank concluded the bulk of the challenge to halt marine debris involves addressing inadequate municipal solid waste management. Many of these countries, they're coming up the stage of development. 40% of the population doesn't have any collection of household waste. So that's an important issue, an important challenge that needs to be solved. And our view on this is that plastics and other litter in the environment is unacceptable. We believe plastics provide very important societal and environmental benefits. But to keep those benefits, we need to keep plastics and other waste out of the environment. And we have a role to play, plastic makers have a role to play in helping to provide those solutions. To that end, our American Chemistry Council helped found an organization recently that was launched in January of this year called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. This organization's a new 501c3. It has committed $1.5 billion over the next 5 years to help with infrastructure, innovation, cleanup, and other aspects of ending plastic waste in the environment. And it will also, primary focus will be in those rapidly developing countries in Asia that lack the waste management to properly prevent materials from getting into the environment. In addition to that, we have challenges here in the United States. We need to dramatically increase recycling and recovery of plastic and other materials. Particularly, we have challenges now and problems now with China and cutting off the importation of both paper and plastic from around the country, around the world, really. And so we've got work to do to get to a full circular economy for plastics and other materials. We've established goals. Our 2040 goal is 100% of plastic packaging being reused, recycled, or recovered. And 2030 goal is 100% of plastic packaging is recyclable or recoverable. In addition to that, we established a goal that 100% of our division U.S. manufacturing sites participate in Operation Clean Sweep, which is a program of containing the pellets, the raw material that's used to make products and keep it from getting out into the environment. So good housekeeping in our facilities. So getting to this circular economy for plastics is going to take innovation and take new work, take new technologies to get there. Certainly mechanical recycling is going to play a very important role. This chart shows that plastics is made primarily with energy. 3% of the energy used in the United States, 3% of the fossil fuels go into making plastic. And we use that material, make new products out of it for a wide range of applications. And at the end of life, our goal is to recycle that, mechanically recycle that, or make it into other new products. So new technologies being developed, chemical recycling technologies, advanced recycling and recovery, that takes this plastic, can break it back down into the raw materials, and then convert it back into a new plastic product. So that new material has the exact same performance properties as it did before it was recovered, so it offers the ability to put things back into the exact same kinds of applications. So designing these new and inventing new circular business models is something that's very important in our agenda to get to our 2040 goal. Expanding access for recycling. Still today in the United States, there are places that don't have adequate access for recycling, especially rural locations. Consumers, making sure that consumers know how best to recycle plastic products is an important part of it, and investing in new infrastructure and this transformational technology that I talked about that can take plastics, break it down into its raw materials, and make new plastics out of it, as the kind of things our members will also be investing in. So partnerships are a very important way that we're going to get there as well. We have been very involved with the Recycling Partnership, which is helping communities across the country to increase recycling of products, as one example of that. Another area that's important is that we're working on recovering of plastic is plastic film products, product wraps, things like dry cleaning bags, wraps around cases of soda or tight case of diapers, or wraps around paper towels or toilet paper. All those wraps can be brought back to the grocery store, put in the bin at the front, and get recycled and made into new products. Our goal is to double film recycling to 2 billion pounds by 2020. We've got some good partners in that with US EPA, Sustainable Packaging Coalition, State of North Carolina, Florida, Connecticut, and others who have been involved in helping to promote the ability to bring that material back to the grocery store, get it recycled, and made into some new products. In addition to that, we have a partnership called Materials Recovery for the Future with many brand owners that is looking at and doing research on taking other materials and how it goes through material recovery facilities and to increase the ability to recycle other plastic films in municipal drop-off or municipal collection systems. This chemical recycling technology that I mentioned before is something that we see growing very much here in the United States. There have been many announcements about this kind of new technology. Agilix is a company in Oregon, for example, that takes polystyrene, converts it back into styrene monomer, sells that styrene monomer to a company called America Styrenics to make brand new polystyrene out of it. So a real circular economy for polystyrene in that case. Another organization called Brightmark Energy just broke ground on a new plant in Indiana that will take materials and make it into plastic materials and make it into fuel. So a lot of innovations happening in that area and growth in the new technologies there. From a policy perspective, there is a lot happening. As Angela mentioned, in addition to that, there's federally the Save Our Seas Act, which was signed into law in 2018. Also, the ACC, we supported the Microbeads Free Waters Act of 2015 and pushed that phased out the use of microbeads in personal care products that really didn't have a solution. They wasn't a good stewardship program for those products, so those microbeads in personal care products were phased out. We think that was a good approach. In addition to that, we've supported straws upon request. We think that is a very good approach. In that case, you're asking a consumer, a person coming in for a drink, would you like a straw or not? Many cases, I know personally, I don't necessarily need one, so I prefer not to take one, and that reduces waste. We prefer that kind of approach to a ban, in part because we think bans force the use of alternative materials and don't really change the way people think about how they use products. I was recently in Bermuda on a ship dealing with marine debris, and in Bermuda, they were automatically putting paper straws in my drink, and I really didn't need one. So we don't really think that's the right approach. And I've weighed those paper straws, and they tend to weigh about 3 times more than the plastic straws, so they're likely to have a higher environmental burden. In addition to that, we also support material neutral requirements on recycling and composting. For example, that plastic packaging, or all packaging really, all materials, be recyclable or compostable by 2030. So those are some examples of the policies that we've been involved in and supporting. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Great, thank you, Keith. So now we're going to switch gears and go into a question and answer portion of today's webinar. We have a few questions already, but don't forget, if you have a question, type it in that chat box on the left. Let's go to our first question. Has there been a movement to establish maximum contamination limits for microplastics in drinking water? Angela, were you planning to address that?
Sure, yeah. I think that's a really good question. I know there's been a lot of study on the amount of microplastics that are in our tap water and other drinking water. It seems that it's the same in bottled water or tap. But there hasn't been necessarily a limit that I know of for how much can be allowed into that. I think the studies are still trying to get at the sources of the plastic and how that might be filtered or prevented. I know with microfibers, reverse osmosis was one thing people were thinking about. So recycling water to where it's in the potable state, which would help with, at least here in Southern California, a lot of the water supply issues. And also help get the microplastics out of the water. So it seems that regular filtration does not address that. And because microplastics are also found to be airborne, that adds another complexity of how to keep it out of the water. So yeah, I think it remains to be seen, but that's a really good question.
Keith, did you have anything to add on that?
Well, I know some states are looking into it. First, there would need to be developed good protocols for actually measuring material in drinking water and health effects data. You know, US EPA has a system it goes through in establishing maximum contaminant level goals and MCLs for drinking water. And you need to have good methodologies for doing that. You know, labs have clean rooms or companies manufacturing things like electronics have clean rooms because dust is in the air and could contaminate samples. So you need to have very clear protocols on actually how to do that kind of sampling and monitoring it. And I don't think those exist right now.
Next question. The technology to break down plastics into their chemical compounds, would that allow plastic film to be upcycled into a more durable material?
Absolutely. It could be, you could take polyethylene film, for example, the material that's used for dry cleaning bags, and convert it back into ethylene that could be used for any polyethylene application, including currently a lot of material is converted into decking boards and with very durable application, but it could be made into new drinking water pipes or parts for cars, et cetera. So yeah, it goes back into the exact same raw material and same performance properties and could have a wide range of uses there.
And
yeah, and I'm not too, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm not too certain about the chemical recycling process. I think Berkeley Labs have actually announced a breakthrough a month or so ago. I just know that one concern brought up by environmentalists are the toxics which could be recycled into that packaging, and then the energy, how energy intensive is it, and what are the chemical byproducts when undergoing that process.
National labs have looked at chemical recycling and have looked at the emissions associated with it. The emissions are comparable to a food manufacturing facility, and the greenhouse gas emissions are lower. So it offers a lot of opportunity there.
This is a question for Keith. What do you think is the best way to change consumer behavior toward reducing plastic use?
You know, I think that's something we have to be careful about, because I think in many cases, if you go back and start using some alternative material, you're actually going to increase environmental impacts. Like I showed in the previous slide, going back to a steel can for coffee would dramatically increase greenhouse gas emissions, and that's not what we want to do. There are some applications where people don't actually need could use a reusable, or could use a reusable bag, could use don't need a straw in certain applications. So, you know, I think we ought to think about whether we need a product in every case, and certainly we support people using reusables as well. So that's one opportunity. But switching back to alternatives could clearly increase other environmental impacts, and we want to avoid that.
Angela, would you like to address that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we say reusables, like make everything reusable that's possible, and then recycling as a last resort. You know, I think people put a lot into their recycling bin just thinking that it's recyclable, but right now it's ones and twos and maybe a little bit more than that. So, you know, I think people think we're doing better than we actually are. If you're able to tour a recycling facility, they'll kind of break down, oh, hey, and we can't do anything with this black microwave food tray because the scanners can't capture it. And that's why it's just best to reuse and reduce as much as possible. And that's kind of what Surfrider tells all of our members and supporters.
Angela, I'll put this to you first. How are straw bans taking the needs of disabled people into account?
Yeah, that is a great question. I know Surfrider chapters were one of the first to get on the straw ban. You know, you don't need a straw, straws suck, stop sucking. There's all those campaigns. And they really caught on like wildfire. They got some celebrity support. But the backlash was with the people with disabilities community. And it's something that we absolutely want to take into account, and there has been language put into a lot of local ordinances, a lot of statewide bills, saying that a straw must be provided for anyone who needs one. So I think the straws upon request bills, which are kind of the lighter straw bill, are definitely take that into account. Anyone can get a straw if needed. And it's really important to look at every segment of society when coming up with this legislation. So just a really good reminder to understand the audience and what these products mean to different people.
Keith, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I think it is important to make sure we consider everyone when we're establishing laws like this. And what's a good example of why straws upon request is a better approach than a widespread ban. I think another population that's important here is children and families. I know when I had little children, having a straw was a very good thing, and it reduced a lot of damage to cars and other places. So that can have an important role, and I think that the alternatives don't necessarily meet the needs of families either.
Keith, is promoting the concept of zero waste becoming a topic of discussion, just like reducing plastic usage?
I think, zero waste is certainly a topic that people talk about. I think we tend to talk about it more in the concept of circular economy and making sure that we recycle and recover all plastic packaging. Our goal there is to get to zero waste and making 100% of plastic packaging recyclable or recoverable, and getting it all back and making new products out of it. So, so that is an important concept.
Angela, would you like to speak to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have international movements like Break Free from Plastic that fully recognize it's not just plastic. It's our relationship with our consumer products and the throwaway culture that we've created, and that can be, a plastic bag or a paper bag, and it's really changing consumer mindset and changing our waste amount and infrastructure. So, like I said, still pushing to reusable products, and everything should go to zero waste. And I've seen a lot of great movement in that direction. And even though Surfrider has Rise Above Plastics movement, we're actually very much on board with the zero waste mentality and game plan.
Along those lines, Angela, has there been any statute or ordinance to ban paper along with plastic?
Well, with bag bans, you see a ban on paper and ban on plastic, fee on paper, or fee on both. And we recommend both of those structures of the bill. Interesting in California too, with zero waste, is the California Circular Economy Act and Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, SB 54 AB 1080, is actually structured at reducing single-use packaging. So it's not just plastic packaging; it's any single-use packaging. So really driving people towards reusable, towards using less packaging, and reusable products.
Keith, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add on the bag bans and things that ought to be considered, and that's the recycling of other product wraps. Dry cleaning bags, wraps around cases of soda, and things I mentioned that can be recycled at the front of the grocery store. I just urge caution in the legislation to make sure that the recycling infrastructure for that other material is continued, because if you pass legislation and don't consider the impact it could have on recycling of that other material, more of that material could end up in your community's material recovery facilities, as consumers won't know what to do with their plastic bags and other product wraps anymore. The dry cleaning bags, wraps around cases of soda or bread bags, things like that can all be brought back to the grocery store. And so I think California required the continuation of that kind of infrastructure, but even still, we've seen the drop in collection bins in many places. So that's something to be very careful about.
This may be our last question. Is it anticipated that the U.S. will be prepared to handle the increase in recycling, or will the products need to be sent elsewhere to be recycled?
I could take a first shot at that if you want. The Basel Convention was recently passed. Some changes to that are going to require prior informed consent of shipments of mixed plastics to various countries. So I think that export of plastics from the United States is not something that we anticipate going forward. There's growth in recycling here. There's a lot of growth that I showed on one of my charts about that we see investment in recycling infrastructure happening here, and these new chemical recycling technologies that can break it back down into chemicals that can be reused to make plastics. So we see a lot happening there to stimulate investment, and this really couldn't happen before with China. China really dominated the materials markets for paper and for plastic throughout the globe. Europe had similar challenges and is facing similar challenges today in terms of lack of domestic processing technology and infrastructure. We don't have it because nobody could compete against China. China could purchase it and use it to feed their manufacturing facilities. With that ban, we see a lot of investment going on in the United States to make new plants and products, and very encouraged about that.
Yeah, I agree. The Basel Convention is going to say basically there's an international bans on shipping waste abroad, so the U.S. is going to have to start doing more recycling and creating more recycling infrastructure. I think that's something that's going to be incentivized with the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act at the federal level, and I think a lot of states are looking at it too with the China National Sword. And then the graph that Keith showed about where plastics are entering the ocean, I think a lot of that was the U.S. had a small dot, and the big dots were Indonesia, China, and that was actually U.S. trash that's been shipped over there, which we say, oh, it's recycling, it's being shipped for recycling, but they just didn't have the infrastructure to do so. So that's why we've seen bans of taking U.S. trash and recycling in those nations now, and now that's going to force, the U.S. to really deal with the recycling markets here and the infrastructure. And like I said, I've seen some movement in that direction.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify something on that for a second. The data from Jenna Jembeck was domestic use and domestic purchases of products. So that estimate of 8 million metric tons per year was from domestic consumption by Chinese, not the importation of waste from other countries. It came from World Bank data for that, so that's the way that was developed. But the point, the issue about whether or not they were recycling everything is an important one. In some of that material, there was stuff that couldn't be recycled, and material recovery facilities here in the United States weren't necessarily doing a great job because China had lower standards for how clean the material would be, and that ended up with a lot of trash, and it probably was not being handled properly in many cases.
Yeah, and I think that's what led to the Basel Convention and the China National Sword and Indonesia ban of U.S. trash.
One more. How are states or countries considering how the market influences the profitability of recyclables? Would anyone like to address that?
I think that's a tough question. I think there are some things that we used to do here in the United States in terms of markets and encouraging markets for the use of recycled products and recycled content products. The environmental purchase preference lists were something that could help stimulate some of the markets for material with recycled content, and that's something we could take a look back at and refresh. So certainly people could, instead of buying or could buy composite decking, and that would be lower maintenance for communities, and would use recycled content product wraps and stuff that I mentioned before. So that's one way that they could help increase the profitability of recycling.
And I would say I haven't looked too much into recycling. We're really focused on reuse and behavior change towards reusables to create a more manageable recycling market. But there's product stewardship councils and other NGOs that are more expert on the recycling front.
Okay, well, I'd like to extend a final thank you to our presenters. We greatly appreciate the expertise each of you were able to provide. And thanks to all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks. You can register on our website for that. And have a great rest of the day.